Greetings from Envika. Thanks for joining today's wildlife webinar session. This session is 15th of the series and there is an exciting lineup of speakers in the future as well. The webinar is moderated by Kiran Bagade and myself. The whole idea behind the sessions is to share the knowledge and best practices to a larger audience. With that, let me quickly introduce today's speaker, Abhisheka Krishnagopal. Nature and art have been inseparable part of Abhisheka's life ever since her childhood. Abhisheka has had the opportunity to live and work in close proximity to wild animals while she was involved in urban wildlife rescue and rehabilitation for more than a decade. She has worked as a wildlife researcher studying birds with research institutes like ATRI and BNHS that took her to extraordinary landscapes from the foothills of Himalayas to the southern tip of India. With a degree in visual arts and a master's degree in ecology and environment, Abhisheka amalgamates her experience in field ecology and the medium of art to create environmental awareness in both urban as well as rural communities across the country. Currently, she works with Nature Conservation Foundation with the Early Bird program. We are very glad to have you with us today, ma'am. Over to you, ma'am.
Thanks a lot, Dhanush and Kiran, for inviting me to this session. And thanks everyone for joining in. So today we'll kind of briefly look at what environmental art is, or what is the kind of art people have done to connect to nature, or what can kind of keep away from doing art, thinking that they're not trained in art, or they're not talented enough, they're not creative enough. But how can we break this barrier, and how can we all, whether we are trained or not trained, can indulge ourselves in environmental art? So I'll try and keep it as visual as possible and not too text heavy. So we'll just look at a lot of images. Yeah, so let's look at few images here. These are some detailed illustrations of insects by this artist called J. Hayes, who was employed by Thomas Hardwick during the East India Company days. And Thomas Hardwick actually employed a whole lot of Indian and Western artists to document India's flora and fauna. Here's another example, and again by the same artist Hayes. This is an Indian chameleon that was seen in the Calcutta garden. And you can also notice the way the color of the animal has been depicted here. Here are just a couple of works that I have done with watercolor. Now, these kind of works, most of you must be familiar with, because as people who like wildlife and nature, you must be familiar with a lot of nature illustrations. So these are just a few examples of natural history art where the artists strive to kind of draw their subjects true to life. Now, this style of art is used to understand and record the uses of the subject that are being documented. Now, let's go back to history and look at how humans depicted the natural world around them in the form of art. These are images of Bhimbetka caves in Madhya Pradesh, where the earliest illustrative drawings can be found in India. Sorry about the bad images. I mean, these I just clicked with my phone, but you can always go online and look for Bhimbetka cave paintings, and you can see detailed images. And so these cave walls and stones are painted with very basic forms from nature. So these are mostly line drawings with a bit of color filled in, and these are all just natural colors that people who lived in these caves used to depict the life around them. Like there are a lot of, you actually see that there are a lot of animals in here, the animals that they encountered or hunted. If you also look at the objects from the Indus Valley civilization, one of the oldest civilization which emerged in the northwestern part of India. So they too had these motifs that represented the natural world around them. The seals and the engravings were all basically wild animals. And then on the right, you see a seal which actually shows a Ficus religiosa tree, a people tree, which was very sacred to the people of Indus Valley civilization. And so through these, whether they're articrafts or whether they're just illustrations that they did, or some utilitarian objects like, pottery and stuff, we can kind of get an idea of what kind of flora and fauna people encountered around them. Depiction of flora and fauna is quite commonly seen in most of our ancient temples. So they're kind of used to convey stories or as decorative elements. This is on the wall of a terracotta temple in West Bengal. And so a lot of big mammals like elephants and cheetah and lion or horses, they all represent power and strength, which the kings who kind of commissioned these temples really enjoyed. So they're not only talking about power, but also sometimes, many times you see like a lot of birds and animals that were also kept as pets by the royal family have also been shown in this temple architecture, which also shows kind of their compassionate side of humans towards animals. So here on the top left, so this bird, the swan, which is the hamsa, is it's a very common decorative motif in most temples and is depicted in various attitudes, like it's whether it's flying or feeding or cleaning its feathers. So you see various forms of this bird, and it's either carved close to its natural form, or sometimes the artist also the sculptor takes the liberty to make it more decorative. But then this here, the image that I've put up here is a very special carving of Hamsa in a Bodh Gaya temple. Here it's kind of, the artist has rendered it in a very in a kind of an abstract form. So they took the freedom to also be creative and not just depict animals the way they were in nature. But then if you look at the one on the right, so these are water birds, cranes. So they don't really have any symbolic significance like the Hamsa had. So they just function as birds, and so they're kind of rendered here very in a realistic way. So there are many other animals. There are many reptiles and birds and mammals that are depicted in this in temple architecture. But if you see, I mean, these are images of the makara. So these are actually closely related to the fish, and somehow makara gains superiority over all the water animals in this temple motifs. So in many temples, it almost looks like a fish, but later over the years it kind of changed form and became more like a mythical creature. So here it's like a combination, it has features of like a crocodile and an elephant. The legs are of like a horse, or it has ears like the elephant. So it just, they just took the liberty to change the form and come up with their own mythical animal. So the Mughal rulers did not really also lag behind when it comes to depicting the natural world in the form of art. Several Mughal miniature art shows hunting scenes in the jungle, where you kind of get a glimpse into the kind of wildlife that might have been sighted in those days. The Mughal ruler Jahangir, he commissioned artists to depict rare birds and animals and plants in the minutest of detail. So this painting here is called The Squirrels in a Chinar Tree. It's one of the greatest natural history miniature from Jahangir's time. And it's painted by an extremely talented artist of his time called Mansoor. So in this painting, you see that, it shows different species of like mammals and birds and plants. And also you may not be able to see here on the slide, but if you actually zoom into this painting, you'll see that there are tiny little birds like here and down here. There are almost like 6 species of birds that have been depicted here in detail. Then there were other Indian miniature paintings which also depicted nature, especially the Ragamala paintings, which means the garland of ragas. So the series of paintings depicted various ragas from Hindustani classical music. And what's interesting is that many of these ragas were also associated with autumn, etc., and also the times of the day like dawn, dusk, and so on. And so these paintings not only spoke about the raga but also depicted the seasons. And this is a wonderful example of intersections of painting, poetry, music, as well as nature in Indian art. Now, if we travel to the east, like the Far Eastern art, artists there also express their connection to nature in their own way. And here are a couple of examples from Chinese paintings. The one on the left is a study of a pomegranate tree, and then on the right is a landscape painting. So the Chinese artists generally they don't paint the subject directly while observing the subject, but it is mostly like the way the natural history artists do, or many of the Western landscapes artists used to do. They would just sit out in nature and then paint directly what they saw. But here, the artist may just walk into a forest and deeply, observe the trees or birds or mountains around him. And then back in his studio, he might paint what he felt or what he remembered. It's almost like he sees the natural world from his soul or spirit, or or we can say, like, he sees it from his heart and he paints from his mind's eye. Landscapes stage where painting also was a way of documenting what they saw in the truest form. But then there were also several artists who painted nature in their own style. So here are just two examples, one by Van Gogh and the other by Turner, who painted in Impressionist style. These are landscape paintings in Impressionist style. Here on top is a Varli art. So here also you can see that they're documenting their own lives. And what is nice here is also the observation of of things, of the natural world around them. If you see this tree, there's actually a weaver nest. This is a weaver nest. So they kind of also included that while they're talking about their own life. And here is a Madhubani art, where again a lot of their motifs come from nature, like fishes and snakes and birds. And these are drawn in very simple designs, like lines and curves and circles. And this is a photo from a village in Orissa. I saw this across Odisha landscape in most of the villages where people would have decorated their house with this lime paint. And then here also you see that they've actually depicted birds and flowers. So it's so nature becomes such a big part of their everyday life. Yeah. So I would like you to tell me, if you can type in the chat box and say if you consider this an artwork. Okay, so most of you do. Okay. That's nice. Okay, that's nice to know. Yeah, so this is actually a very famous work called Spiral Jetty by this artist called Robert Smithson. It's done, created at Great Salt Lake in 1970. So this is called a site-specific work, where the artwork is made at the site, not in the studio or not on paper. So it is basically meant to interact with changing conditions of the surrounding water, land, or atmosphere. Now, what the artist did here was he collected a lot of basalt earth, which was scooped from the beach at the beginning of the jetty, and then from here, and then it was kind of the material was dumped to make the outline of the spiral, if you see here. So this was a barren site which was once used to mine oil. Okay, then another photo. So what do you think about this work? Do you think it's environmental artwork? So basically, this is by Bob Johnson. It's called the River Cube. So here, what he did was he kind of harvested a lot of debris which was found in the local rivers, and then he also kind of created like a sculpture of trash to be displayed close by. So this is also kind of artwork related to environment. Now, another one. What do you think of this? Is it an environmental artwork? So this is again, it's called The Zero Circle by an artist called Daniel Dancer. So here, He has placed the circles of stone on the roads which were used for logging and mining on public lands. So these are all installation works that were meant to raise awareness of private profits made from mining, logging, and grazing. So these were the way the artists protested against what was happening to the environment. So then, what is environmental art? So we saw that at least in in our history, there's been environment. I mean, nature has been such a big part of our. I mean, whether it's the way we did art or music. So it's just been such a big part of our life and culture. So, the term environmental art kind of emerged in the West during there was something called as the environmental art movement. So it was an art movement which emerged in United States in the late 1960s, where many artists kind of stopped merely representing the land through paintings and sculpture. So they didn't want to, like, just make paintings and sculptures the way the landscape looked, but they wanted to go beyond that, break that way of representing something in a realistic way. And then instead they also wanted to make some art at in the environment, at the site. And so this is also a kind of art that kind of helps our relationship with the natural world. And also it is something to help us find new ways to coexist with our environment. Now, environmental art kind of informs or interprets nature and its processes, or it educates us about environmental problems. And it can be of various kinds, from land art to crop art or performance art, even bio art or documentary, or to do with acoustics. So I mean, the artist can take the liberty to create works in any form she or he likes to depict. So much of this kind of art is ephemeral, which means they are made to disappear and transform. It is not something to hold on in a gallery or at home. And also, it's designed for a particular place. And many times it kind of involves collaborations between artists and people from other field of work, maybe like scientists and educators, or communities come together and create these environmental art. And it is also an art form that is created in nature using natural materials. Many artists use just what they find in nature, like stones, leaves, and soil. But then there are also others which you saw who use trash to create art. Then most often environmental art exists in the open. It's left to change or erode under natural conditions. It's not protected. And so let's look at a few more examples of land art or earth art. Now, here's one. Jean Paul is a French, France-based artist. He kind of operates in everyday use sites like farming lands, dumping grounds, often introducing elements of profitability, like which means like growing crops and harvesting from it. And in 1992, he created his first agricultural composition, and which kind of very soon was followed by other artists in France. So the picture that you're seeing here is one of his most representative works, which was actually made by transforming about like 250 acres of dumping ground into a landscape full of many types and colors of plants. So what you see here, all those colored things that you see here, are actually plants. Like, he used this dumping site and converted it into this beautiful landscape. And then in the center of these circles, there are actually there are like biogas sensors which capture methane that is given off by buried human waste. And these also provide valuable source of energy. So he's also looking at not just like decorative element, but also to see how they can utilitarian value of these landscapes. Now, here's another example. This is an installation art. So here on the right side is an oil derrick, which on the left side you see people like in different poses, like the sculptures in different poses, trying to, in their own way, like they're trying to pray. So on the right hand side, which is the oil derrick, is kind of, it signifies God, like they're trying to pray to God. So it's a very this is an artwork, this is an installation where the artists are trying to dramatize the worshipful relationship and dependence we modern people have towards oil or petroleum. I mean, we know that there are wars being fought for oil. They're trying to show how oil has replaced God in our life today. And also, apart from the sculpture that they created in an event, they also had a performance following installation. Now, I'm sure many must have either heard of the name Andy Goldsworthy or at least seen some of these works on the internet. Now, he's a British sculptor, land artist, and an environmentalist. And he creates these temporary landscape art installations, or we call it the site-specific sculptures. He just uses, stones and sticks and anything that he finds when he's outdoors and makes these artworks. So what you see here underneath the trunk of this tree, they're all actually leaves that he's placed, which actually looks like some light, but they're all leaves. And here also the circular thing, he just placed different kinds of leaves to create this effect. And yeah, so his work may kind of aims to find a balance between our relationship with nature. Then this is a sculptor called Spencer Biles from France. What he did was he actually settled in the forest with his family for an entire year and created a lot of sculptures using natural materials. So if you look for Spencer Biles, you can go and check out those intricate natural sculptures that he's created within a forest, just staying there like for a year and experiencing the wilderness closely and making these sculptures part of wilderness. This is an example of trash art. So several artists we know of late are collecting trash and turning them into works of art. So this is a project called Washed Up by a Mexican artist called Alessandro Duran. He collects trash that is washed up by the ocean currents in his place, very close to a nature reserve, and then he makes these really cheeky sculptures and installations. So he sorts them out by color and shape, and then the trash is positioned to kind of imitate natural shapes like pools, like what you see here is, it looks like a pool, but a colorful pool, but they're all actually bottle caps in a way. So they mimic the environment they invade, sending a message about consumption and trash. Here's another example of an artist called John Dalson, who uses again these collects a lot of trash, and then he turns them into artworks. These are framed, they can be put up in the houses. And there are also many artists who use trash to make objects that are useful also. So art is not about just painting, sculpture, or what we saw land art. Even so, communicating about the natural world could also be done through other forms of art like music and dance. So here's just an example of a performance where the artists express through the human body the complex role that a ficus or a fig tree plays in the ecosystem. So this was actually performed at one of the scientific conferences in Bangalore in JN Tata Auditorium. So what I'll do is I'll just show you a small clipping of this, of one of the sequences. It's a 1 hour piece, but I'll just show you like maybe 3-4 minute clipping of one sequence where before I show you the clipping, I would like to just read out a small text for this particular sequence. This is written by Dr. Mike Shanahan, who's a well-known rainforest ecologist now based in London. So he talks about why fig is called the keystone species, so that with the text you can understand the performance better, I feel. So I'll just read this out. The banyan's mass of roots descend from a body and branches, creating a matrix of hollows and thick woody walls. Those smothering roots have plunged into the fertile earth, tapping water and nutrients and conveying them skywards, where they nourish the growing crown of leaves and thousands upon thousands of red ripening figs, whose flesh will feed a myriad of creatures. These trees produce roots that grow fast and strong even in the toughest of ground and can keep growing through several meters of earth until they reach water. Fig trees have survived cyclones for generations. They have also survived drought and extreme rainfall, offering a lifeline to wild animals. Collectively, ficus species have much to offer as we come to terms with a fast changing climate. So in this sequence, you'll see how there's drought and there's a cyclone. Many species die, but then how figs are able to survive because they have these long roots which are able to tap water, and that's why they're called the keystone species. Yeah, so these are just of like to what extent as an art piece. So few suggestions would be like, you can just go out into nature and watch patterns in nature, and you can either copy them the way they are, or you can just take these patterns as inspiration and the patterns that you really connect with, and you can reflect on your feelings and your thoughts and your experience that you felt while being close to nature and seeing whatever you, and then finally you can transform them into artworks or objects or patterns to create some creatures or objects or whatever you feel like. So these are just some suggestions. Now, so what I meant are these things. So when we look at nature up close, when, instead of just taking like a glimpse, if you can look at every object that is in nature up close, you can see these amazing patterns in nature, whether it's like the homes of animals or flowers or pollen, or the veins on a leaf. And yeah, these are other examples of the kind of patterns that you see in nature on feathers and lichen and flowers. And so what we can do now is, since I had asked you to keep your paper and pen ready, so we look at some patterns in nature. So what I've already done is taken some patterns and I've drawn them here. So I would like you to copy them. One suggestion is you can copy them the way they are, but then you can also change them the way you like. So for example, if you all have your paper and pencil ready, so here's the first one. So this is something that I took from the scales of a snake. So if you actually look at the skin of, say, cobras or rat snakes or vipers up close, you see this kind of pattern. And when you actually look at animals up close is when you also notice a lot of tiny details, such as the way these scales are overlapped here. Next. Now, so if many of you are familiar with fungi, so there's this kind of a fungus that grows on a dead wood, which is called the bracket fungi, or a mushroom which is very hard. So I picked up these patterns from those. Again, as I said, you can either copy it as it is, or you can make your own design. You don't really have to copy my drawing. And this is a very good season for you to go out and watch mushrooms and look at the beautiful patterns different species of mushrooms have. And this bracket fungi is like amazingly beautiful. This is just a linear pattern from a palm leaf, the way the lines emerge. Now, why I'm showing you all this is, so when you want to do art, I mean, we are very used to geometrical patterns, lines and squares and triangles and circles. So it would also be nice to just get out into nature and bring in patterns from there. This one. So this is actually picked up from a leaf which had these water droplets on it. So I just copied those patterns from the droplet. So this is what I meant when I said you don't have to exactly copy the patterns from nature. If you want, you can, but you can also, take inspiration from there and come up with your own designs. If you have ferns around you, even the decorative ferns at home, just flip them and look at the bottom side of these ferns. They have these beautiful spores, and different species of ferns have different kinds of spores. If you have a magnifying glass, do make sure to take a look at them. They're just too beautiful. So ferns are not just fascinating in the way the leaves are shaped, but also the spores. So yeah, do I hope the session will inspire you to go out and start looking at the natural world around you and getting inspiration to create some form of art. So what you could do is, this is just an example of an artwork by a friend, Nobina Gupta. So this is not like realistic. It's not like painted what she saw there, but then she was inspired by what she saw in nature, and then she included that in her painting. You could also, so this is another artist, Roshan Sahi from Bangalore, who actually, uses art in the way he designs his garden and horticulture, because he, apart from doing art, he also sees his garden and vegetable planting also as earth art. So you could actually, when you grow plants, you can start designing your, garden as a form of art. And then these are just some example workshop that I conducted for people who and many of these work. I mean, these kind of works can be done without any training in art. So if you have a fear of drawing, just go and create works with natural material around you. Yeah, as a conclusion, what I would like to say is, environmental art has the power to unleash imagination, and it can foster creativity. It can convey feelings towards nature and send messages about the need for environmental justice. But environmental art is also capable of causing damage to the environment if we have little or no deep understanding of how an ecosystem functions. For example, the spiral jetty that many of you really liked, it's a very celebrated sculpture, but then it also involved inflicting considerable kind of damage upon the landscape, because a huge area like the earth was lifted, and it could have damaged a lot of microorganisms in that landscape. And it's also important for environmental artists to not just think of aesthetics and beauty, but also to move beyond it, and also if they really want to bring in a change, to really move beyond aesthetics. So I think that to do environmental art, I think it's also important to develop a basic understanding of ecology, so that we don't harm the environment, without, I mean, we might want to do something good, but without sufficient knowledge, we might be harming the environment too. So, yeah, thank you. And I think we have some time for questions. So, and I'm open to questions. Okay, there's a question whether Gone painting is a type of environmental art. So when you look at the Western definition of environmental art, it may not be, but then most of the art practiced in India is environmental art, because most all our folk art is about communities. Kind of, for us, nature was such a part of our life. It was not separate like we think today. So the artwork depicted, it came from environment. Also, they used a lot of natural materials. So it is, of course, environmental art. Artist making a living from doing environmental art. How was your journey through it? Yes, so many times when you follow your passion, it's extremely difficult to make a living out of it. I think the balance is to lead an extremely simple life, and that's what has really helped me continuing to do what I do, because my expenses are pretty low, because I lead a very simple life, and at the same time, sometimes you can also like workshops. Many of my artist friends who are not into like full-time jobs do a lot of I mean they do a lot of teaching, which is their source of livelihood, which and then they are free to do the kind of art that they want to do. In ancient times, what colors were made of depends on the region and the landscape. There were a lot of natural dyes made out of leaves and flowers, but also came from minerals.
Hello, ma'am. There are few
Yeah.
questions like which you have missed. Maybe like I'll read out
Oh,
to you.
okay.
So there is a question from my friend Sanjay. Uh,
Uh,
so he asks, "What is your typical work schedule as an artist? Would you please share some work or campaign where you or any other artist work has made any difference for any campaign on ground? Also, would you please share an example where you felt as an artist it was a great art, but it didn't have much impact for a cause? This more to understand what to look for while implementing an artwork."
Okay, so I've been a very my journey has been quite different from regular artists, because what happens in an artist's life, I think mainly they use a certain kind of art style and see where they can use their talent and experience. But for me, what has happened was for me, more than being making a career out of art, I was more into trying to find ways to create environmental awareness or contribute to conservation. So I've not really practiced any particular style of art. I've just used anything and everything I could do in every form, every way possible to talk about conservation. So that's the reason you see that I've done paintings, I've done illustrations, I've done mural art. So the fig performance was something I conceptualized when I felt, okay, I need to find not just visual way of depicting about I mean talking about environment, but also something else like through performing art. So that was one very first experimentation. So for me, it depends on the situation. So where I am, who I am interacting with, and what works best for that particular place. To just give an example, when my very first interaction with kids in a remote Tamil Nadu village, where I thought, okay, I'm going to use sketching to teach them about nature, was a big flop, because sketching just didn't work with these kids, because these were kids whose parents were agricultural laborers. They'd never drawn in school. They were very wild, and so I had to kind of change my approach and attitude to education, because I felt I cannot go with these preconceived ideas that I can use this particular art form and bring in a change. And then and there, when I realized things were not working out, I had to change my approach, completely switch to theater. Say I made these kids do skits, and it worked brilliantly because they just love saying dialogues and acting. So that's how my approach has been. I've never really followed a particular style of art. What It all depends on the place I work. Again, coming to campaigns, so I don't know if you have seen, if you have heard of the Nerulu Tree Festival in Bangalore. Done a couple of years ago. A lot of friends got together and tried to bring in, this awareness about trees. And there you could see how a lot of artists and people from various forms of life came together to enjoy. I mean, talk about trees. A whole lot of artworks were used in this event. And another example I could talk about is I did this mural in a very small village in in Chamrajnagar district, where I got the village youth to paint on the walls. And this was to bring in awareness about, to bring back traditional crops, the traditional millet cultivation, which was lost in the landscape. And when the local youth were painting on the wall, naturally, the villagers started coming and interacting with us. And then kind of a dialogue started off from there. So that way, mural works as a very good medium to, work as a community with the community and in a public space. So it depends on what works really.
So there is another question from Sai. She asks how to make
Yeah.
sure that like the message we want to convey from our artwork is understood clearly.
That is quite challenging. It's a very good question because most often, as educators, we come up with something which we think will work, but would not have worked. But then, so you need to assess. You need to make an assessment. So it can be done both formally and informally. Like formally, if you want to do, like my very first again study that I did when I worked with these kids, I had like actually a kind of a questionnaire, a preliminary questionnaire where I wanted to kind of assess the knowledge these kids had about their local biodiversity. And then after doing the workshops, I did a post questionnaire survey to see if they have learned anything out of that. So that's a very formal way of collecting kind of data to see if your work has made an impact. But I think informally, I think it's through the attitude of people, you can kind of figure out whether your work has made an impact on them or not.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.